All righty. Oh, I can't minimize it while I'm recording. That's great. Okay. Hello, all the humans. I'm Ron Russell, Humanist Chaplain and Celebrant Program Director here at HSGP. Welcome to our 6th Digital Sunday Speaker event. We will continue to provide content digitally until we can gather together again. I, for one, miss the devil out of all of you. I think it's funny that I'm a humanist using the devil. That's okay. If anyone has content or wants to help with content, please see me or one of the other directors. More than happy. A lot of other allied organizations have started producing content as well, which we have started advocating for. So some ground rules. Please stay muted if you aren't actively speaking. Don't be offended if I mute you due to background noise, all right? Raise your hand for questions during the Q&A and I will call on you. If you type your question into chat, I will read it to our Sunday speaker, Izzy, today. Share the air, practice the 10 commitments of humanism, and after the recording stops, hang out, catch up, chat with friends that you haven't seen in far too long. And after that, we also have a board meeting if you're interested in that. So first up, we have Luke with the Executive Director update. Luke?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Luke Douglas. I'm the Executive Director of the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. I'm also the General Counsel of HSGP, which is why I'm so excited about the legal subject matter of today's talk. It's with an issue near and dear to my heart, and that I was very excited when I got to reach out to the American Humanist Association to request a speaker from the Appignani Legal Center to talk about separation of church and state in that context. I want to welcome all of you to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. We are a warm and welcoming community of atheists, agnostics, humanists, and free thinkers of all types. And everything we do, from content like this to community service, is made possible by our members like you. Anybody who has recently become a member or renewed their membership, feel free to give a shout out in the comments. We'd love to give you a quick round of applause and welcome, to just say hi and welcome you to our HSGP family. Now for me, I actually renewed my membership between now and the last meeting, so I am in my 2nd year as a member of the HSGP family, and very proudly so. Speaking of what we do being made possible by your time, talent, and treasure, I hear very good news that our Amazon Smile fundraising program is doing very well right now. This is a program you can learn more about on our website at hsgp.org under the page Ways to Support HSGP. If you do shop on Amazon at all, just feel free to sign up for Amazon Smile, which allows a percentage of what you spend at Amazon to go to the charity of your choice, and we are an option. So if you're spending the money already, we may as well take some and not give all of it to Jeff Bezos, and we'll be more than happy to try and make our community a better place with that. And we want to keep that program growing as well. I do have one very relevant update that's also near to my heart. You know that we cross over a lot with other organizations, including the Secular Coalition for Arizona. They go to the state capitol, they lobby, they engage in politics and activism and defend the separation of church and state in ways that we can't as a different type of nonprofit organization. And so many of you know I serve on the board of the Secular Coalition for Arizona, making sure that HSGP's interests are represented there, and also that I can have some crossover between the two organizations. If you've seen an increase in the number of events that are being co-sponsored between the two organizations, that's essentially why. And I am proud to announce that we just made our annual contribution. We wanted to do a whole ceremony where I stood up and handed Zenaida a check in person at an in-person meeting, but it looks like that's not going to happen anytime soon. So we have delivered the check in the amount of $5,000, and we just want everybody to know that we are in this together. And thank you to the Secular Coalition for Arizona for this huge work that we are proud to be a part of. That being said, I think we're ready for Alex's announcement. And thank you all for being here. Zenaida has it.
Yes. Okay, can I say a couple things, Luke, before you move on?
Yeah, I think you can have a minute.
With Alex's permission, if I can go, turn your sound off, Jennifer. Yeah, I have to shut Jennifer off over there in the background so that I can talk without feedback. I want to say thank you to the membership of HSGP, of Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix, and to remind all of you that actually the Secular Communities, Secular Coalition for Arizona actually started at HSGP meetings where we all met and decided that we wanted to do something to counter the actions of the Center for Arizona Policy here in Arizona. And I want to say hello to Debbie Allen, who is the Executive Director of Secular Coalition for America. I see her in the audience. Good to see you again, Debbie. Sorry I missed my annual pilgrimage to Washington. We'll have to catch you next year. So at any rate, I do want to say thank you to all of you and the membership and the board of Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. And I want to say thank you, not just on behalf of the board and staff of Secular Coalition for Arizona, but frankly, on behalf of all Arizonans. Early in our existence, when the Center for Arizona Policy was trying to marginalize us, we decided that every policy that we were advocating for actually accrued to the benefit of all Arizonans, all of them, including the people who are in the Center for Arizona Policy, whether they know it or not. And so we refused to get marginalized. And honestly, ever since, we have made it substantially easier for our government, our Director of Government Relations and lobbyist, Tori Roberg, to effectively form coalitions and attract allies to our cause at the legislature. So she has, primarily through her efforts and the force of her work and personality, she has managed to launch very effective programs. So thank you as an Arizonan and as a member of the board of the Coalition Arizona, Secular Coalition for Arizona, for your generous contribution.
Thank you, Zenaido. Thank you. Secular AZ is one of the things that brought me into humanism and HSGP specifically. So thank you. Thank you for your part. Alex?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Alex Zygmunt. I am the president of the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. As mentioned earlier, we are having a board meeting after this meeting, roughly 2 hours from now, starting at noon. So if you want to stick around on Zoom and participate, make your voice heard, listen in on what we've got going on in the coming months. We'd love to hear from you and have your opinions shared with us. As previously mentioned, we do provide an annual contribution to the Secular Coalition for Arizona in the amount of $5,000. But in addition to that, we also provide a donation to Camp Quest Arizona. Camp Quest is a wonderful organization helping kids across the state have a fun place to go that's, you know, they can learn things and not have to be essentially beaten over the head with dogma. So we are proud to present a $1,500 check to Camp Quest Arizona, and that's always a pleasure to support that organization. If you can do so as well, please look them up. We will provide links in the chat, and you can find that there. Next up, this is the month that we actually officially begin seeking board nominations for year 2021. That being said, at present, nobody has mentioned that they are not going to be running for 2021. However, we still need to have a board nominations chair and committee. So we need volunteers to that effort, partly because it is explicitly stated in our bylaws that we can co-chair each position. So the president can have a co-president, the vice president can have a co-vice president, etc. And as we are continuing to grow, we're needing help getting some of these, some of these positions filled and make sure that they're well supported. So if you would like to run for the board, please do so. If you would like to be the nominations chair or on the committee, please let me know. We will get that started for you. And the last thing I wanted to mention is essentially that we are in, because we are growing, we are in need of help. We need volunteers, people to help with things like IT. IT is always a huge in need right now, especially as we're continuing to work on our website with the YouTube channel and that sort of thing. Communications could use some assistance as well, helping with things like Twitter, Instagram, etc. Meetup page, Facebook, that sort of thing. But the biggest one that we need help with right now are our programs committee, essentially. While Ron has been doing some fantastic work and made sure that our programs have been just top notch during his service here at the community center, he needs help. And the last thing that we want to do is burn out our fellow members. So please, if you would like to assist with that process, I either contact myself or Ron, and we will make sure that your voice is heard and you get to help with that process. So I've said enough for today. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you enjoy the program.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, and as part of the working together with Secular AZ and other networks, I wanted to highlight some of the events that we have been doing and some of the events that are upcoming. So from a Secular AZ perspective, Dr. Dwight Moore did a end-of-life options for terminally ill patients. On June 11th, Athens Humanity presented Racism and Religion in America. And on June 27th, we had the Honor Alicia Sears on Being Black in America. From a Arizona Faith Network, on June 23rd, we did a Meditation 101 session to the Arizona Faith Network, which went really well. Events online. We still have Smart Recovery that's happening every evening except for Thursdays. We do have the Humanist Meditations on Saturday. There is a coffee social meetup that's happening on Thursdays as well. We do have coming up a workshop for white people becoming anti-racists with the book So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Olu. That's starting from Jennifer White. That should be around the July 14th to August 11th timeframe. If you are interested in that, reach out to Jennifer or myself. It's still forming, but wanted to get that word out that we are going to be doing that. And they will have some facilitators as well. Secular AZ on July 18th is having Juan Mendez and Athena Salman for their Secular Superstar Awards. They are two of our huge proponents here in the Valley. And then for the next Sunday speaker on 7/10, we have Clayton Jacobs and Stephen Thomas at the AZ Near Space Research, High Altitude Ballooning for Education. So that's what we have coming up for you in the next 4 weeks or so. So stay tuned and stay engaged. So next up, we have the Humanist Minute, read by Alex.
Okay, I'm going to take up a little bit more air here. So today's Humanist Minute is brought to us by one of our longtime members, and she found a poem that was, I think, apropos for today's times. It's a poem that was written quite literally 4 days after 9/11. And thank you very much, Mary, for bringing this to us. I greatly appreciate it. The poem is by, let's see here, Rehearii En Banc, and the poem is entitled, It's Time. It's time that we understand our role as stewards of this planet, that we respect and honor the delicate balance of our world. It's time that we realize we are all one people, that separateness is an illusion, and that in truth, We are all connected. It's time that we see past the veil of illusion called separateness and understand just how connected we really are. That we are all made from the same substance of the universe, and by harming another, we are only harming ourselves. It's time we see past the color of one's skin or the name of one's God. We realize that we are merely traveling parallel paths leading up the same mountain. It's time that we stop searching for happiness outside ourselves, that we turn our attention inward and tune into the calm peace of our souls. It's time, if we see something in the world that needs to be changed, that we do as Gandhi suggested, be the change we wish to see. It's time that we take responsibility for making the world a better place, that we strengthen the foundation of our communities by being of good character. It's time that we ask, how can I make a difference? That we leave this world in a better shape than when we arrived. It's time that we listen to each other with empathy and compassion, that we overcome the fear in our minds so that we can experience the love in our hearts. It's time that we go past ego and discover our innate spiritual essence, that we release our selfish desires and serve humankind unconditionally with love. It's time that we love all, serve all, that we be at peace. It's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Mary. That was wonderful. Byron Katie says, if you're unhappy with what's without in the world, what's external, then start looking within. And that's a beautiful message. That's a beautiful message. Thank you. All right. Welcome to the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix. I am Ron Russell, Program Director here at HSGP. If you like our content, please smash the subscribe button. No, really, honestly, subscribe, please. It helps. If you want to contribute in a more material way, please become a member. Donate to our Patreon account, or better yet, volunteer your time, treasure, and talent. Today, we have Izzy Oldfield on defending the wall between church and state in today's climate. I'd like to go over why this aligns with our values. So from a critical thinking perspective, how does the belief in an imaginary being affect our legislation when the actors are making decisions based on that belief? From an ethical development perspective, fairness for all people of all religions and none. Fairness, cooperation, and sharing is ethical, and we need to be continually evolving and growing. And then from a global awareness perspective, the end goal of global awareness is global citizenship. Each recognizes our personal responsibility to foster a healthy and dignified life for everyone in our global community. It's my privilege to welcome Izzy Oldfield. Izzy Oldfield is the paralegal at the American Humanist Association's Appignani Humanist Legal Center. Izzy Oldfield graduated from George Mason University with a bachelor's degree in government and international politics and minors in French and legal studies. She then went on to complete an ABA-approved paralegal certificate at Georgetown University's School of Continuing Studies. Please give me a big HSGP welcome for Izzy Oldfield. Izzy?
Hi, everyone. Just bear with me one moment while I get my presentation up for you all to see. Okay, and we should be in business. So thank you all for having me, specifically to Ron and Luke, for the invitation to present to you all today. And as Ron mentioned in his introduction, I will be talking about defending the wall between separation of church and state in today's climate. And by that, of course, I mean specifically Trump's administration. So I hope that you all leave this presentation with the same smiles that you started with. So the first thing, and Ron kind of alluded to this when he was mentioning sort of the ethical foundation of what we do and why we litigate, is just to mention, of course, the fact that paper, the US Constitution, creates that legal framework, but it's actually the litigation and the work of judges and secular attorneys and the plaintiffs' clients that are brave enough to step forward that actually make this living, that make it living rights, that make it applicable to all of us. So we want to continue to ensure that equal treatment of all religious and non-religious minorities is the practice going forward. We have to continue working towards the fullest expression of religious freedom, and that in order to protect healthy pluralism, we have to protect our minority communities, because of course, as we know, pluralism actually helps with collective wisdom when we are actually aware of all perspectives. And no system of belief or group of people should receive preferential treatment. So here in the United States, it's an uphill climb to make sure that we don't have Christian nationalism sort of be conflated with US patriotism. So just to kind of give us all an understanding of sort of the legal grounding and the difference between the wall of separation of church and state and then actually the legal framework that we can point to, I just want to remind us all that the term the wall actually comes from Thomas Jefferson's writings to the Danbury Baptist Association, where he said in pertinent part, "I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislatures should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." And thus we then have the wall of separation between church and state, which he goes on to use in later writings. So that was January of 1802. But we know that our actual legal framework comes from the First Amendment in the US Constitution, which states Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that then becomes known as the Establishment Clause, and then you have your Free Exercise Clause. And I think this is important to know what the scope is in terms of what types of cases we can bring, why the American Humanist Association takes some cases, can't take others, because this is the amendment that we use to be able to handle federal cases. And I will show you next that the 14th Amendment then is what gives us the legal vehicle to make it such that the First Amendment applies to all states. So in the landmark case of Everson versus Board of Education, which was decided in 1947, they ruled that, in fact, public busing to private religious schools would at that time be permitted. But fortunately, the Supreme Court held that the First Amendment Establishment Clause was fully applicable to the state governments. And this is really important because this is what gives us the mechanism to go into other states, say, be it South Carolina or Nevada, and we can petition for the rights of humanists and atheists in those states because the states have to follow the First Amendment via the 14th Amendment. So you all being a chapter of the American Humanist Association are most likely familiar with this, so just humor me here. But I just want to point out the fact that we were founded in 1941. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C., and given the pandemic, most of us are teleworking currently, but we're still fully operational and still keeping up with all of our programming. And our work specifically is targeted at protecting the rights of humanists, atheists, and other non-theistic Americans. And the AHA advances the ethical and life-affirming worldview of humanism, which, without beliefs in any gods or other supernatural forces, encourages individuals to live informed and meaningful lives that aspire to the greater good of humanity. So just like any program work, including our legal center, this is the guiding motto, if you will, of any work that we take on. Our legal center was launched in 2006. And since then, we've litigated dozens of church-state separation cases all across the country, both at the federal level and at the state level. And currently, our legal staff is composed of both our legal director and senior counsel, Monica Miller. We have a staff attorney, Colin McNamara, our legal fellow, Andrew Hewlett, and then myself working as the paralegal. So to kind of put this all in context at the moment, we are fighting an uphill battle because of the fact that we have Trump in office, and the religious right and just conservatives in general have been very, very strategic about being sort of single issue voters and making sure that they did everything possible to work on the judiciary. They never hid that from us. You know, they said specifically they wanted to have control of the judicial branch because that would help them to further legislation and law and legal precedent that favors their own belief system. So this week was pretty monumental in that Trump's 200th life tenured judge appointee confirmed by the Senate was confirmed by the Senate just this week, and those appointments are done via Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution. So this is Trump's 53rd circuit appointment, and this is super significant because while the Supreme Court gets a lot of the national news coverage, it's actually the circuit courts that handle most of the appeals, and on a yearly basis are sort of setting precedent within the actual circuit appeal system. And then, of course, we're all aware of the most prominent appointments on the Supreme Court, those being Justice Neil Gorsuch's appointment in 2017, followed then by Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was confirmed via the Senate in October 2018. So this is all important to keep in mind because with this being the sort of the landscape right now and who's in control of the judiciary, that's going to change our entire strategy for what cases we decide to take, what the outcome of these cases are, and sort of how we handle things going forward. So I do want to just take a moment to remind everyone about the Bladensburg Cross case. Ultimately, this was a loss for us, but it's worth mentioning because, of course, the AHA was counsel for respondents. We tried our hardest to uphold the rights of our plaintiffs, who were 3 men in the surrounding area of Bladensburg, Maryland, who brought our attention to this 40-foot tall cross blatantly in the middle of an intersection, and understandably an endorsement by the government of the Christian faith. So we brought this case to the U.S. District Court of Maryland in 2014. And keep in mind that in 2014, Obama was still president, and we didn't have to worry about a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. So the players, if you will, just to set the stage, you had the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, and that was the government entity that was maintaining and using taxpayer funds to keep the cross erected there, to do repairs to the cross. And then you also have the American Legion, which was the group that sort of, sponsored the cross. So as far as it being a monument towards World War veterans. So throughout this litigation, you have all these different players, and the biggest thing, of course, being that how can this be a monument to World War veterans if it's not honoring all veterans? Because we know that there are Jewish veterans, we know that there are Hindu veterans, and specifically if you look back at some of the court records, they said that this was a monument to all veterans, not just World War I veterans. So that, of course, begs the question of, which veterans matter when it comes to honoring the lives of those lost. So we're in the district court. In November 2015, the U.S. District Court upheld the constitutionality of the cross. So that was a loss for us, and we decided to appeal to the Fourth Circuit. We do so. Monica Miller argues our side in December 2016. And then that following fall, in October 2017, we were elated to get a ruling in our favor in which the district court, they reversed the order of the district court and ruled that the cross was in fact unconstitutional. And I just want to read this, foundational part of that judgment. Even in the memorial context, a Latin cross serves not simply as a generic symbol of death, but rather a Christian symbol of the death of Jesus Christ. Displaying the cross, particularly given its size, history, and context, amounts to excessive entanglement because the commission is displaying the hallmark symbol of Christianity in a manner that dominates its surroundings and not only overwhelms all other monuments at the park, but also excludes all other religious tenets. The display aggrandizes the Latin cross in a manner that says to any reasonable observer that the commission either places Christianity above other faiths, views being American and Christian as one and the same, or both. So the government wasn't happy with this ruling, and they filed for petition for rehearing en banc, which en banc, to those that aren't as familiar with legal jargon, just means that they were asking for the full panel of the circuit to reconsider the decision. So once that happened, a majority of the active judges on the Fourth Circuit voted against the government's motion and upheld the decision, finding the cross unconstitutional. So once again, our victory was preserved, and this is what sort of led up to the march to the Supreme Court. So in June 2018, the government and the American Legion petitioned the Supreme Court for certiorari. Now, this is just a legal term that distinguishes when a body brings a case to the Supreme Court and asks them to consider a case. You have that first decision of whether the court will take it in the first instance. And then later, if the court decides to grant cert, then you have a case on the merits. So this is the first stage. So we filed briefs in opposition. And the interesting thing about this is that because it was both the American Legion and the government who were petitioning the Supreme Court, we had to file 2 opposition briefs. So it was almost like we were fighting 2 different cases at the same time. And those cases did end up being consolidated once the court granted cert and decided that we would have to argue this and the case would be decided on the merits. So pointing out here again, sort of the situation in which Brett Kavanaugh was then confirmed to the US Supreme Court. And I actually lobbied on Capitol Hill with other secular groups that were asking congressional offices not to confirm Brett Kavanaugh into office or appointment on the court. And of course, he won just by 2 votes, and that was the difference. So we delivered arguments on February 27th, 2019, just last year. Monica delivered that. And she was up against some pretty hefty competition. Not only was it kind of a losing case from an optic standpoint, because we're seen as taking away this old landmark monument, even though it's a Latin cross. But we also were arguing against Neil Katyal, who is a talking head on MSNBC. He's argued 40 plus cases at the Supreme Court. And I think that's an interesting thing to note about the Supreme Court too, is that it tends to be the same attorneys arguing over and over again. And so we were at a disadvantage in terms of coming from having never argued at the Supreme Court, and then, with 3 months' time having to get ready for those arguments. So the Supreme Court ultimately issued its decision on June 20th, just a year ago. And as we know, the outcome wasn't in our favor. And this is just a sketch, an artist's portrait of, you have Monica speaking to the 9 justices. And it was, even though we lost, it was definitely a huge milestone for the American Humanist Association and the secular community as a whole, the fact that we were able to go all the way to the Supreme Court. And there was, I was in the audience, but there was kind of a chuckle from everyone when at one point Monica actually went, "Happy human." And that was just a surreal experience that she was actually doing that in front of the justices. So if you all have the time or inclination to listen to the oral argument, I definitely recommend it. It just helps to kind of understand what the system and process is beyond the headlines and articles that you see after a decision comes down. So although we lost, fortunately, Lemon versus Kurtzman still stands. And this is really important because this is where we get the 3-pronged test that sort of governs government action and whether or not it is constitutional via the Establishment Clause. So a law must have a legitimate secular purpose. It cannot have the primary effect of either advancing or inhibiting religion, and it cannot result in an excessive entanglement of government and religion. So all of these things are really relevant, but oftentimes we will emphasize the excessive entanglement prong. So in the outfall of the American Legion decision, we then had the Pensacola Bayview Cross. And the Pensacola Bayview Cross was in active litigation at the time that we were also litigating the Bladensburg Cross case. And I might also add, this is worth mentioning now, if you're, sitting at home, you might wonder, why would we choose to litigate religious symbolism cases when there might be, in your opinion, more harmful things that we could be taking action on as well? And I would just say that oftentimes it's the difference between, a marginalized community member and someone who's part of the Christian majority. I live in the Northern Virginia suburbs, right outside of Washington, D.C., so I'm surrounded by a huge diversity of religious beliefs. I didn't really face an uphill climb for having secular beliefs my entire childhood, but that isn't the case for a lot of people, and I'm sure it's not the case in Arizona. So keeping that in mind, that is why we take these cases, because when plaintiffs come to us with these complaints, they're reminded constantly that they're not part of the community when they're looking at a display, whether it's, a monument like this that's there year round, or if it's a monument that's put up like a nativity display that you see every year. And it kind of reminds you that, this holiday that brings everyone together isn't for you, it's only for the Christians. So that takes us to the Pensacola Bayview Cross, which was a loss for us in the 11th Circuit. And this was, they did attempt to bring it to the Supreme Court, but what ended up happening is the Supreme Court sent it back down and basically said, hey, here's our decision in American Legion. Use this as the guide for you to reconsider and make a decision in the Pensacola Bayview Cross. And at no surprise, they decided that the cross can stand because it also is historical. And while we would argue, it's a Christian cross, you can't say it's anything other than a Christian cross. They made the argument that it's historical. It has more to do with the community's history than anything else. And the same thing can be said of the County of Lehigh cross seal, which you see photographed here. So this was a case brought by FFRF that eventually made its way to the Third Circuit. And at the Third Circuit, they also determined that the cross was more symbolic than anything of history, rather than it being the Lehigh County's government endorsement of Christianity. So that was obviously a loss for us. And then you have a couple back-to-back losses, but we do have a couple victories. The first of which is our Carroll County legislative prayer case. And this is significant because it comes off the heels of the Town of Greece case, which provided that certain prayer, given the context and circumstances, would be legal. But in situations where you have commissioners, in this case, delivering sectarian prayers, meaning that they were, overtly Christian, they invoked a Christian God, no question about that, you are still stigmatizing audience members, and you are making it very clear that you represent, the Christian majority, and that's not okay. So we got a favorable outcome, a favorable settlement in that case. And then we also have our Greenville County School District case, where we received a favorable outcome in that instance, but the school district recently decided that they would appeal. And so we're now working on an appeal in the Fourth Circuit. So our continued advocacy, this is a list of some cases that were filed, after Bladensburg, and some that were filed before. So our Arkansas 10 Commandments Monument case is being litigated in the Little Rock District Court. It has to do with a 10 Commandments monument that was installed at the state capitol. And as you all may have seen from a lot of news stories, Senator Jason Rapert doesn't really shy away from talking about the fact that he believes that government is based off of a Christian moral foundation, that our laws are based off of a Christian moral foundation. And so he wanted that to be symbolized at the state capitol. So we are fighting that case alongside the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the ACLU, and the Satanic Temple as well. Then we have our Ocala prayer vigil case. And this has been years in the making. It's still before the 11th Circuit currently. And we are waiting on a case to come down at the Supreme Court that has to do with nominal damages in civil rights litigation, which nominal damages, again, for those that may not be familiar with it, has to do with a type of damages that, it's not a large amount. It could just be $1 per plaintiff that you're awarded, but it's significant because it's the court making a statement, saying that this person was wrong and therefore they have to pay out damages. So for example, when I was talking about the Carroll County victory, we got nominal damages. So the AHA was paid $1 and each of our various plaintiffs were paid exactly $1, and we framed them for them. So we also have our school prayer case, which again, I mentioned is both a victory, but now it's back in litigation. And we are trying our hardest to make sure that we preserve the win. We also use demand letters to advocate as well, because the goal isn't really to litigate. It's very time consuming. Civil rights litigation takes years before you actually get an outcome, whether it's favorable or unfavorable. So really, if you want to affect change, your best avenue for that is to send warning letters and hope that under the threat of litigation, local government, administrative officials or school principals and school superintendents will see the error of their ways and reverse course. And, oftentimes you would hope that public school officials are aware of the US Constitution and Supreme Court precedent when it comes to not having coercive religious curriculum or assemblies in US public schools, but oftentimes they're not. And so you just have to offer them a refresher, and we're able to make a lot of headway there. We also have our amicus briefs, which are friend of the court briefs. And this is a tool that we'll use to sort of persuade the US Supreme Court bench or the circuit court benches to flag to them the things that we find the most notable, what our stance is as far as defending the secular community, and just pointing out the overall legal framework that we think that they should be looking at. So we filed amicus briefs in some of the most prominent Supreme Court cases that involve the Establishment Clause. So I'll talk later in this presentation about the Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue case. And there's also a couple of ministerial exception cases that have particular relevancy to the secular community as well. So we were all shocked, I'm sure, by the mid-June issuance of a decision in the Bostick versus Clayton in consolidated cases. So this had to do with Title VII provisions for federal employment discrimination. And in this decision, it was a 6-3 split. Neil Gorsuch said, in part, the statute's message for our cases is equally simple and monumentous. An individual's homosexuality or transgender status is not relevant to employment decisions. And then also said, but to refuse enforcement just because of that, because the parties before us happened to be unpopular at the time of the law's passage, would not only require us to abandon our role as interpreters of statutes, it would tilt the scales of justice in favor of the strong or popular and neglect the promise that all persons are entitled to the benefit of the law's terms. So anyone who follows the Supreme Court was shocked to see this coming from Neil Gorsuch. But I think the biggest thing is for us not to get too comfortable, because while he's acknowledging here that sex discrimination, gender discrimination, and sexual orientation discrimination are all protected by Title VII, there are nuances to this. And I'm sure that the religious right will bring future cases to ensure that they're able to claim exceptions from this. So there are 3 cases, some of them are consolidated cases, but 3 cases that we're still waiting for opinions to come down on. And for those that may not be as familiar, the Supreme Court term generally runs from October of a year to June of the following year. So right now, October 2019 started off the term, and it's due typically, they'd wrap up decisions and things like that before July. But this is a unique circumstance because of the pandemic. Some arguments were delayed and then ultimately held over conferencing. So while we'd hope to see all the cases come down on Monday, tomorrow morning, most likely they'll announce a couple other days to announce decisions as well. So the Espinoza versus Department of Revenue case is significant because 3/4 of state constitutions protect taxpayers from being forced to fund religious education, a fundamental principle and traditional value. In this case, the Supreme Court could decide to overturn these protections and insist that religious schools be included in private school voucher programs. And this case also was, a difficult one to litigate and sort of win public opinion on, because of course the opposition, those that are defending the religious right and sort of the school choice, school voucher, Betsy DeVos's of the world, they argued that one of their plaintiffs took on an extra custodial job. Her children were being bullied in schools, and that is the reason why she sent them to a religious private school. And in order to finance their tuition there, she really needed the supplemental funds that she might receive from this voucher program. And while it's a beautiful sob story, it still doesn't change the fact that it's unconstitutional, because we cannot have taxpayer funds going to supplement private schools. It's not, what was intended by Supreme Court precedent, and we can't allow it to happen because you don't know what would come next. We also have the Trump versus Pennsylvania case, which is consolidated with Little Sisters of the Poor versus Pennsylvania. And this is one of these religious exemption cases where they are claiming that religious organizations and employers should be exempted from providing contraceptive coverage to their employees via the Affordable Care Act. So you have them chipping away. They've not been shy about this, but they're chipping away at, a woman's access to birth control, chipping away at any federal guidelines. The Affordable Care Act mandate that employers have to provide this basic access to coverage. And then lastly, you have the Our Lady of Guadalupe School versus Morrissey Baru, and this was consolidated with another case that has similar legal framework. So 2 fifth grade teachers at private Catholic schools were fired for discriminatory reasons, one based on her age and the other after she was diagnosed with breast cancer. But their employers invoked the ministerial exception, a legal doctrine that excludes clergy and religious personnel at houses of worship and religious schools from the legal protections against employment discrimination. So the reason why this sets off alarm bells for us is because it invokes what's called the ministerial exception. And this is problematic because the Supreme Court hasn't yet put any kind of line in the sand. So we don't know where this ministerial exception stops. Sure, it might be logical that they should be able to decide, who their pastors and ministers are and fire them if all of a sudden they convert to atheism and start spouting atheism at the pew, because it's not a question of free speech, it's a private organization. But then when it comes to teachers and then let's say custodians or bus drivers, this is problematic because simply not sharing the beliefs of the organization shouldn't be a reason for you to be fired for performing those duties. And in this case, you have clear class violations of age discrimination and, getting sick and potentially being costly to your employer, even though healthcare should be a human right. And they're invoking a ministerial exception to make it so that they can't be sued for employment discrimination. So that just gave you a snapshot view of the 3 cases that we're waiting to see come down from the Supreme Court. And obviously those decisions will change the landscape yet again. And most likely we will be on the defensive because the issue, of course, is that religious freedom is being used as a weapon. And so secular attorneys are constantly on the defense of trying to preserve, what little momentum we have. And we will probably be on the defense for a while until we're able to sway the judiciary back to a majority that favors our interpretation of the Constitution. So working at the AHA, and I'm sure is the same at most secular offices as well, we have to be selective about actionable cases. And when I was mentioning the Bladensburg Cross case, for example, that's a symbol case, a monument case that unfortunately we lost. So we have to be, very mindful about, do we want to bring cases like this forward again, which not only what might we lose, but we might lose more footing when it comes to the lemon prongs that we still have retained. And you also be mindful of the fact that, again, these cases take forever to litigate, not just, because you're briefing, but also because courts put their emphasis on criminal cases, because with due process, they have to be speedy about those trials. That isn't necessarily the same with civil rights litigation. You don't need an immediate remedy, so it can take years before you actually get a decision in a case. And you have to be mindful of the fact that plaintiffs don't necessarily want to be the pariah of their communities. Oftentimes these school cases, like for example, our Greenville litigation, we proceed anonymously. So we ask for the court to accept our petition as a DOE plaintiff petition against the school district to try to protect the identity of the school children and the parents. But in either way, there's still pushback that they faced from the community. So it can be a tough decision to decide, like, yes, this is a violation, and yes, I want to put myself out there as the one to push this case forward. We also try to use other tools at our disposal before we even reach litigation. So again, I mentioned the fact that we use demand letters and friend of the court briefs to be able to push forth change in the judicial branch, but without, sort of an inefficiency of resources. And we don't want to have to litigate things, because if action can be solved outside of the courtroom, that's honestly the faster resolution for both parties. And I just want to point out also the importance of grassroots organizing and community action, because a lot of times these cases are brought after bad legislation has already been passed, right? So you have the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, you have things like, In God We Trust legislation that provides that should be put up in every school classroom. And then we're asked to bring cases to declare that to be unconstitutional. But honestly, sometimes grassroots organizing is the most effective tool, because I am sure that if you have, an Arizonan approaching a school board about something like that versus Washington, D.C. outsiders approaching that school board, they sort of look at us as outsiders trying to cause trouble, versus it being, actually you do have atheist and humanist community members in your area that deserve to be seen and heard, and not to be made to feel marginalized. And then, of course, we work with other secular organizations. So we've had litigation in partnership with the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We work with Americans United. We work with the ACLU. We work with the Satanic Temple, Center for Inquiry, and American Atheists, because there are so few of us in the civil rights world that fight secular litigation battles, that we have to be able to collaborate with one another, because you can't reinvent the wheel with each of these different needs and court cases. And then we also really, really want to prevent bad precedent. So in some things, it can't be prevented. Like, for example, you have abortion rights being rolled back in southern states like Alabama or Texas or even, Virginia, but we're working towards that. And Planned Parenthood and ACLU will bring forth cases to try to get those encroachments on abortion access from going any further. We, have the unfortunate thing of, you got a conservative majority, you don't necessarily have public opinion on your side. So you have to be super strategic about what cases you bring to courts, because you may not get a favorable outcome, and an unfavorable outcome may not be worth a shot at a favorable outcome. So I want to also encourage everyone to join the fight at whatever level you're able. I know Luke Douglas is a counselor, so he would have an opportunity to get involved at a legal level. But for those of you that you haven't gone to law school, you're not involved in litigation, there are other opportunities as well. So I'll first mention the Humanist Legal Society, which is a network of legal professionals made up of paralegals like myself, clerks, professors, and then attorneys as well. And to be part of the Humanist Legal Society, you don't have to be a nonprofit litigator or a secular attorney. It's just a matter of, having humanist ethics that guide your view even in your interpretation of the law and your, your personal pursuit of what you do as an attorney. And our cooperating attorneys is kind of like our bench of local counsel. So our 2 attorneys on staff, we have Monica Miller, who is licensed in both California and Washington, D.C. And then she's also, barred in front of a bunch of circuit courts in the U.S. Supreme Court. But let's say that we want to bring a case in Tennessee. We don't have the option of doing that because we don't have a Tennessee licensed attorney. So we would look to our cooperating attorneys list to find someone that was Tennessee licensed to help us bring a case in that area. And it is quite the feat because, as you can imagine, in some of these states, it's not the popular thing to be an open secular, and especially an open secular attorney who will be seeing judges over and over again. So that can limit the cases that we're able to bring. So the Humanism for All Pen Pal program with our incarcerated humanists, I'm hoping that you all are aware of it, but if you're not, I want to bring it to your attention because, as you can imagine, it's already hard enough being part of the marginalized community as a humanist and a non-theist, that you can imagine it's even harder to be in a situation where you're in a federal penitentiary or a state prison, and there's plenty of service and activities and programs provided to Christian inmates, but it can be harder for humanist and atheist inmates to find the same resources for their sincerely held secular beliefs. So if you have an interest in just being a pen pal for these humanist incarcerated persons, I highly encourage you to get in touch with myself or with others at the AHA so that we can set you up with that connection. And then our Center for Free Thought Equality, because of course there's different avenues to fight the same fight. We try to litigate change, but it's also important that we legislate change. So if you're in a position where you can run for office, be it local office, national office, please do. And if you can't, support candidates that are doing that work, that are putting their names out there, that aren't shying away from their non-theistic beliefs. And political advocacy is a huge part of the change making that we need to do. So I provided my contact information. If you all have violation reports, you're welcome to just go to our website, humanistlegalcenter.org, and there's a contact form there where you can provide a detailed summary of the violation. Keep this information on hand, should you have friends or family members that reach out to you about a possible violation, you can point them to us. And my email address is ioldfield@americanhumanist.org. And then we have our social media channels, which we are very active on. I've provided the link to our not link, but the tag for our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and currently we have a fortnightly Legal Tuesdays segment on Facebook, which if you haven't had a chance to check that out, they're just 5-minute segment videos, super informative, super quick. So you can soak up sort of, some legal knowledge about common questions in short increments. And then I would be remiss not mentioning our annual conference. So as you might know, the World Humanist Congress was regrettably canceled because of the pandemic and the health risks that we'd be exposing all of you to, as well as the guest speakers and staff. So instead, we are doing a virtual conference, which will be held on August 8th, and it is called Distant But Together, a virtual celebration of humanism. So with that, I'll conclude the portion of me talking at you, and I am, really excited to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Izzy. That was amazing. That was great. Thank you. There have been a couple of questions that have come in. As always, if you are interested in asking a question yourself, you can raise your hand. I will see your hand get raised and call on you. Otherwise, I will go ahead and read these questions that we've gotten. First one is from Zenaido, and the legal panel of Arizona, AZ, has had success in obtaining compliance from municipalities and school districts through demand letters. What has been the record of the AHA legal team in getting favorable responses to demand letters and other non-litigation approaches?
So I know that our current rate is 8 out of 10. We don't actually send that many in a given year compared to other secular organizations that might send thousands. We actually send less than 100 every year. But for the ones that we do send, we do get positive responses.
Okay. Another question from Roxanne. Can we borrow some of the logic used to allow the removal of Confederate monuments?
I guess I'd love for that person to elaborate, because I'm having a hard time understanding just what the overlap is.
Roxanne, care to elaborate?
Yeah, I just had to unmute myself. No, I was just curious. It's kind of offensive, and it's to me, it's the same sort of hate type stuff almost, where they're putting it in your face and forcing an opinion upon you, and not making any exceptions. So I'm kind of, I like to think, of some of these old-fashioned ideas that people don't want to get rid of, and the lack of desire to change, I think, is a lot of it too. So
yeah, no, I think I understand now, because I think also too, it's, when you're talking about Confederate monuments now, right, they mention the fact that if you take down the monuments, you're also erasing history. But what they don't talk about the fact is that, like, when it comes to the history of, violence and subjugation of people, we don't necessarily need that flagrantly in our public parks. You can just have, information that actually is historical provided at museums versus some kind of erected monument that's almost like, we'll go to this person's feet to worship them, which is kind of the same thing, with the Christian cross monuments, as far as them not acknowledging the fact that there are non-Christians that also see that monument and don't see it as a testament to, the heroic work of veterans. They see it as, a reminder that the Christian majority wants you to know that they're the Christian majority.
mm-hmm.
I can comment real quickly on the legal side of that, Roxanne.
Okay.
So Confederate monuments have been coming down in part because the cities and states that put them up are voluntarily voting to take them down, which they could do with crosses and Ten Commandments displays the same way. There's just not enough public demand for that right now. And another portion of them are being taken down by vigilante violence, like by crowds pulling them down, not legally, and you can debate whether it's ethical or not. So if we had enough popular demand to take them down through the city and state channels, we wouldn't need the federal courts to order them to be taken down.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you. Next up, we have Nixon, who has raised his hand or her hand. Nixon?
Hi, hello.
Go.
Hi, yeah, thanks for taking my call. I was wondering, how do you prioritize what cases you would take? Is there some kind of algorithm that you use? And then if so, is there, do you go back and look at the results and kind of refine your model to get a little bit more accurate in your decision making? Thanks.
Sure. So with it being that we are, pro bono attorneys, myself a paralegal, but we're only able to bring cases because of donations to the American Humanist Association. So we have to be mindful of the fact that if the overall goal of the American Humanist Association is to further humanism and non-theistic belief, then we have to be tactful in what cases we prioritize, because obviously if we spend all our money litigating unsuccessful cases, well, then we've effectively just lost all that money and we haven't made all that much progress. So I would say, yeah, I mean, we're very mindful of losses, like, for example, these religious cross losses, because they are losses. When we get new complaints, we are not eager to take them on, because also every legal case is very fact specific. I'm sure Luke will say the same thing, but you have to look at each case for the individual circumstances. And in some areas, like if it's a case that's, let's say, brought in California, we might be way more successful because the district courts and the Ninth Circuit can be friendly grounds for us to bring a case versus say, a case in the Fifth Circuit, which we may not want to bring because Texas is not exactly, the best place that you can be an atheist trying to battle for, the Establishment Clause to be reinforced. So yes, we definitely do prioritize things. There isn't any kind of, fancy algorithm. It's just a question of, our attorneys deciding what cases will have the best chance of winning, which cases are the most important for fighting for humanist rights at that time. And then of course, also just our board members and our executive director, deciding what cases we should bring forward as well.
Thank you. Harold, did you unmute yourself because you have a question?
Yeah, no, I have a question and I wanted to say hello to everybody. We haven't been involved in a while and it's nice to see all your friendly faces. A number of years ago, Doreen and I were at a humanist retreat in Montana and we had an opportunity to meet Mr. Appignani, Lou Appignani. But the question I had was regarding the state constitutions that are threatening to allow public funds to support religious schools. I assume that would include Jewish yeshivas and madrasas and other religious schools. And secondly, wouldn't they have to, each state do that individually? Those are my questions.
Okay, so I would point back to the Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue case as sort of the pinnacle example of this as far as state constitutions, trying to put forth policies that make it so that taxpayer money can't be used for religious purposes. And once we have the outcome of this Espinoza case, that's going to determine a lot as far as, what states can do with providing voucher programs and going forward from that. You're welcome to repeat any part of your question if I missed something.
Whether providing public funds for religious schools would include yeshivas, Jewish yeshivas, or Muslim madrasas and other religious schools.
Yes, it would. I mean, so a lot of times you'll see our coverage and national coverage emphasizing Christian schools just because oftentimes that is the majority and those are the, sort of the entities that make it so that we bring litigation in the first instance. But no, Islamic and Jewish schools would not be entitled to that supplemental income either.
Okay, thank you.
Anita, did you unmute yourself because you have a question?
Yeah. As far as having the, excuse me, all the religious monuments torn down, why not add monuments from other religions and from the Humanist Society, the Happy Humanists, the Bopapet from TST, a menorah, other just representative of other belief systems, adding that to the monuments surrounding the ominous crosses.
So that has actually been an argument made and, concluded by justices before as well. And in some cases, it is practical. Like, for example, when you're talking about nativity displays, instead of, marching forward with litigation, we, just submit a happy human, or sometimes you have the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I don't remember what they call it, but, they have the banners that they put up. And you have, for example, the Satanic Temple, their behemoth statue that they, have put up at the state capitol, for example, in Arkansas. And that's like a different tactic where, we're saying, thank you, Baphomet, you can correct me, thank you for that. So in that instance, yes, that is another alternative. Okay, so you don't want to allow us to take down this monument. That's fine, but then every religious belief should be equally represented.
Thank you.
So I've got a question. In a world where Trump gasses peaceful protesters to get a really awkward photo of him with a Bible in front of a church, what more can we do, knowing that a lot of us here do a lot, to stop or constrain this type of behavior that we object to?
I would say the most important thing is that we can't normalize it. So it can be, exhausting calling out every single violation or sending in violation reports or sending out demand letters and that sort of thing. But anytime we see an instance of, performative religiosity is what I would call it, religious ceremonialism. So in this case, we know that President Trump is doing so because he's reliant upon evangelical voters to give him the slightest hope of winning re-election in 2020. So in that instance, we have to, all as secular organizations, use whatever leverage we have to, come out and decry that as an improper use of his government position to be, affiliating himself with Christianity, doing a photo op in front of a Christian church with a Christian Bible, even if it was upside down and probably purchased the same day, it's still problematic.
It was upside down.
Yes. Excellent. Anybody else have any questions?
No.
Go for it, Jeannie.
Okay.
Speak up, Aaron.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Now,
Henry,
can you hear me? Am I close enough? Okay. I wanted to know if the victory in Carroll County, Maryland, if that can be used as sort of as a precedent for us writing letters, for example, to our own House or Senate state legislatures, because I absolutely hate going down there and hearing the prayers that they say, that they start every session with. Can we use a precedent like that just in a in a note to our state legislature? Or can we take it further? Can that be used, for example, as a precedent to if a law student, for example, wanted to bring a suit against the Arizona State Legislature for using prayers, introducing all of their sessions?
So again, the facts, things are fact dependent, but yes, definitely when we're doing our demand letters, and we've definitely sent demand letters after our Carroll County victory regarding religious invocations. In fact, there was a case brought by the Freedom from Religion Foundation trying to get Dan Barker to be an accepted atheist invocation delivery. I'm not sure, in being able to deliver an invocation before the House of Representatives. And we've submitted amicus briefs arguing that if you're going to have, some religious invocations, then even, humanist invocations should be permitted. So there's that argument, but also when you're doing demand letters, you can just, cite to these various opinions. I'm sure I assume Luke Douglas sends out demand letters. I know the Secular Coalition for Arizona definitely does, in which case, in footnotes and in the body of the demand letter, they would just reference back to cases that have to do with legislative prayer.
Okay. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation. Thank you so much. That's a huge amount that you covered.
We're on mute.
Yeah, no, I apologize for sort of the rapid fire approach. Go ahead,
That's why
Henry.
that thing shows yellow when I talk.
Yeah, it does. We're supposed to be unmuted.
Go ahead, Henry and Mary. We can hear you right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is, going back to monuments, Did you ever reference the case of the giant cross in Los Angeles County somewhere? I think it was in the 1930s, I believe, and I think they settled it by selling the land that the cross was on, doing a transfer so that the county got other land and gave the land that the cross was on to a private organization. It seems to me that that is a better solution than allowing tradition to take over everything. And I believe that the courts have said that prayer beginning the legislature is tradition. That's two things, sorry.
No, you're fine. So it's been a little bit, and in fairness, it was also our senior counsel who did most of the briefing. So I can't recall off the top of my head, like line for line, which cases we referenced in our briefing for the Bladensburg Cross case. But yes, land transfers was definitely part of the argument and alternative solution that we looked at. The issue with that is just that it's in a median, a prominent, traffic circle. So even if somebody else owned the median, that really wouldn't be obvious to the average person who drives around it. You would assume that a traffic median is owned by the government. So that wouldn't have been an appropriate solution, in our opinion, for this specific case. But in other instances, yes, especially when it's like, for example, on a remote hilltop and it's, private land, then there isn't really an objection to that because it's private land and it's understood that that land belongs to, a private entity and isn't a government endorsement. And then I think you had a follow-up question, which I would just ask for a refresher on.
What was your follow-up?
Oh, the prayer at legislatures is usually a tradition.
Yes, the issue with that is you can invite members of the public to deliver prayer invitations at legislative meetings, as long as the criteria for anyone who wants to deliver an invocation is equally applied. So if I, as a humanist, ask, the Fairfax County Commission to permit me to deliver an invocation, they can't prevent me from doing that because I'm a humanist. But if you have commissioners, the actual government officials, delivering the prayer from the podium, at the bench with the other commissioners, that is, supersedes it in the problematic nature of it, because there you have government officials in their official capacity delivering the religious indications versus it being outside guest speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? Last call for questions.
Anita has one.
Oh, Anita, go.
I just want to add, and this is shameless self-promotion, there were a few secular invocations given at the Phoenix legislature. Some of you may remember the infamous Ode to Nature or Invocation to Nature incident given by it was given both by Athena Salmon and Juan Mendez, and was not received with any kind of respect. And some of you know what I'm talking about. I was just a comment. And I'm making the comment because I wrote the invocation. So that, that was something that was very inappropriate. I'm not going to go any further with it.
Yeah, they could be a lot better about their behavior on how they treat people when secular invocations are given. I absolutely agree with you. It's been insulting. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Jennifer, would you like to bring up the one thing before we close this out then?
Yes, please. I just want to say that besides being on the board of the Humanist Association in Communications, I am also on the board of Camp Quest Arizona. And we should be in camp right now. In fact, today would be our first day of camp if we didn't have to, if we didn't have to cancel it. And HSGP has been a big enthusiastic supporter of Camp Quest Arizona since we began having secular summer camps in 2013. Every year they give us a generous donation and we appreciate it so much. And I also have a check. Thank you so much. You HSGP members donated $1,500 to Camp Quest, and that helps us a lot. So we had to cancel camp, as you know, and we have there were some costs to doing that. And this will go a long way to help us take care of those costs and start working on next summer. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer. I know I was looking forward to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, thank you for bringing this to our community, Izzy, and thank you very much for coming to our HSGP Sunday Digital Speaker. Fortunately, we're doing these digitally, and we can have people from all over the country come to grace our presence. As always, if you enjoyed our content, please hit the subscribe button, contribute to our Patreon account, or even better, become a member of HSGP. Thank you very much, Izzy. We're going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Thank you. Let's give everyone Izzy a big HSGP thank you. Bye. And I can unmute everybody. I don't want to unmute everybody. That's a bad idea. All righty. Thank you very much.